Hello, friends. Thank you for being with me. Subscribe, like, and let's get started.
The evening was in full swing. The hall was filled with music and laughter. Light jazz sounded from the speakers, mixing with the hum of voices, and the multicolored lights of the mirror ball enlivened the room with a soft flicker. It was an evening when it seemed that the world froze, giving everyone the opportunity to escape from everyday life. Daniel felt like an outsider in this atmosphere. He always preferred silence to parties, but today he couldn't refuse an invitation from an old friend. Daniel was standing at the bar with a glass of whiskey in his hand, lazily watching what was happening. The crowd was motley. His gaze swept over unfamiliar faces until it settled on her. She was like a flash of light in this mass of people. Her dark hair fell over her shoulders in a wave, framing her delicate face. Her smile, even from afar, seemed to invite you to share the secret that lay behind it. She was sitting in a corner, a little detached from the rest of the noise, surrounded by two women who were arguing animatedly about something. But her gaze was directed at nothing. Her hands were gently wrapped around the wine glass, as if she was trying to find the answer to an unspoken question in its contents. Daniel had to make an effort to look away. He was not sure that this was how fateful acquaintances were made, but something about her image attracted him like a magnetic force. And while he was thinking about whether to approach, fate took the first step for him. "Did you notice her too?" Sarah, their mutual friend, asked him, who had just come over for a cocktail. She nodded towards the woman, smiling slyly. "I don't know who you're talking about," he lied, turning away. "Of course you do. This is Amanda. Recently moved here, a widow. Her son is only 3. An amazing woman. If you want, I can introduce you," Sarah offered with such enthusiasm, as if she was doing it professionally. "This is a bad idea," Daniel began, but Sarah had already taken his hand. "Stop it," she laughed, pulling him along with her. "Believe me, you will thank me." They crossed the hall before he could think of a suitable excuse to escape. "Amanda, this is my friend Daniel," Sarah said cheerfully, approaching the table. Amanda looked up, and their eyes met. For a second, he forgot how to breathe. Her face seemed to glow from within. She smiled, slightly embarrassed, and held out her hand. "Nice to meet you, Daniel." Her voice was soft, but with a note of confidence. He returned the handshake, trying not to show his excitement. "Likewise." Sarah, pleased with her role as a pimp, quickly found an excuse to leave them alone, saying that her cocktail was too warm, and she had to fix it immediately. "So," Daniel began, feeling the tension ease a little, "did they drag you here too?" Amanda laughed, and her laugh was like a melody. "That's right. My colleague insisted that I needed a distraction. I don't really like parties like this. So we already have something in common," he smiled, feeling something unusual arise between them. They talked all evening. At first, these were light topics: movies, favorite music, travel. But soon the conversation became more personal. Amanda talked about how she moved to the city to start a new life after losing her husband. Her eyes sparkled when she talked about her son, and her voice grew warmer when she mentioned his small achievements. Daniel could feel her every word pulling him closer. There was pain in her story, but also incredible strength. Her optimism, despite the difficulties she had endured, seemed almost incredible to him. As the evening drew to a close, he plucked up the courage and offered to exchange phone numbers. Amanda hesitated for just a moment, then took out her phone and dictated the numbers. "Thanks for the evening, Daniel. It was nice talking to you." "Believe me, I should be thanking you," he replied, looking into her eyes. When he returned home, his thoughts were all about her. He couldn't resist texting her a short message. "Thank you for a wonderful evening. I hope it wasn't the last time." The answer came almost immediately. "I hope so too." It was then that he realized that this evening would be the beginning of something more. A year later, Daniel was on one knee, holding a small velvet case in his hands. His voice trembled slightly as he said, "Amanda, you've changed my life. You inspired me to be better, to see more. I can't imagine my future without you. Will you marry me?" Her face lit up with surprise mixed with joy. Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded slowly, barely managing to say, "Yes, of course, yes." The crowd in the restaurant, as if preconfigured for this moment, burst into applause. Someone from the neighboring tables shouted congratulations, but Daniel only heard her voice, saw only her beaming smile. The festive evening was held in a joyful bustle. They discussed the wedding plans, the place for the ceremony, the guest list. Amanda held his hand and kept telling him that she thought it was all a dream. But at this moment, he was sure it's the most real thing he's ever felt. The wedding was modest, but sincere. Amanda wanted her 3-year-old son, Matt, to feel like a part of this holiday. He proudly walked down the aisle, holding a pillow with rings in his hands, and then tremblingly watched his mother pronounce vows. For Daniel, this was the moment when he felt like a real family. He accepted Matt with an open heart, and from the very first days tried to be for him not just a stepfather, but a father. Life after the wedding returned to normal, although the adaptation was not always smooth. Amanda moved into Daniel's house, and it took effort from both of them. Daniel was used to his routine and order in the house, and Amanda tried to combine her habits with his way of life. But every morning, when he saw her at breakfast or heard Matt laughing as he ran around the house, he knew it was worth it. One evening, after a long day at work, Daniel returned home, tired but happy. He entered the living room and heard loud laughter coming from the kitchen. Looking in, he saw Amanda sprinkled with flour, and Matt, who was enthusiastically waving a whisk doused with dough. "We decided to bake a pie," she explained cheerfully, not even trying to hide the mess around. "A pie? Are you sure you can do it?" he asked jokingly, taking off his jacket. "You'll see." Matt ran up to him and hugged his leg. "We do everything according to the recipe." Daniel took the boy in his arms and, smiling, said, "Then I am doubly glad that I managed to get home." These were the moments that made him happy. However, behind the joyful facade of the new life, there were also challenges. Amanda often talked about her fears, whether she was coping as a mother, whether she was doing enough for their family. Daniel always assured her that she was his support, his inspiration. But there was also something that depressed him at times. Amanda had withdrawn into herself at times, as if her past still weighed on her. She rarely mentioned her first husband, but sometimes he caught her gaze staring off into the distance. It wasn't words, but a silence that spoke more than any confession. One night, as they were sitting on the veranda with glasses of wine, Daniel decided to ask, "Are you happy, Amanda?" She looked at him, slightly surprised by the question. "Of course," she said, smiling, but her eyes seemed to hide something. "Why do you ask?" "It's just that sometimes I think you're thinking about something that I can't understand," he admitted, trying not to look too tense. She put her hand on his palm. "I have a past, Daniel, and I will never be able to forget him. But you are my future. I promise that I will do everything to make us happy." He nodded, accepting her answer, but a slight worry remained inside him. Their lives went on. Daniel worked, Amanda took care of the house and Matt, sometimes working part-time at a local accounting firm. On weekends, they organized family outings, gathered with friends, or just watched movies at home. One day, Daniel decided to surprise Matt. He bought a bicycle and, returning home, put it in the garden. "Matt, go outside," he called. The boy ran out of the house, saw the bike, and froze in place, not believing his eyes. Is this mine?" "What is it?" he asked, turning to Daniel. "Yours, but only if you promise that you will ride it with me," he joked, bending down to hug the boy. Amanda watched them from the window. She was smiling, but something in her eyes made Daniel think. Was it happiness? Or something else he didn't know? Amanda was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through the pages of a driving school brochure. Her gaze was focused, and her eyebrows were slightly furrowed, a sign that she was seriously considering the upcoming decision. "Are you thinking of signing up for a course?" Daniel asked, glancing at the booklet. He was standing at the coffee machine, making his morning coffee. Amanda looked up, her face lit up with a slight smile. "Yes, I think it's time to learn how to drive. It will make life easier. I'll be able to take Matt to school, do my shopping, be more independent." Her enthusiasm was contagious, and Daniel didn't hesitate to support her idea. "That's great. I'm sure you can do it." They chose a suitable driving school together, and a week later Amanda started classes. Everything went smoothly at first. She came home inspired, talked about how the instructor explained the basics of driving a car, how she managed to park or drive down a busy street for the first time. But after a few weeks, Daniel began to notice oddities. One evening, when he returned from work, he found that Amanda was not at home. This was not unusual. She sometimes stayed late in class, especially if they started late. But this time passed, and she didn't answer the phone. Half an hour later, Amanda appeared on the doorstep, holding a bag of coffee and rolls. "I'm sorry I didn't answer," she said, taking off her jacket. "After the lesson, I decided to stop by a cafe to think about how I cope with driving." Daniel nodded, but something in her words seemed strange to him. She usually told him every detail, but this time her answer was too vague. "Is everything all right? Are the lessons going well?" "What is it?" he asked, trying to speak calmly. "Yes, it's fine," she replied quickly, heading for the kitchen. He didn't insist, but worry began to gnaw at him inside. The following weeks added fuel to the fire of his suspicions. Amanda began to come home later and later, sometimes claiming that the instructor was extending classes so that she could master complex maneuvers. "We parked backwards today. It turned out to be a lot harder than I thought," she said one evening, taking off her shoes at the front door. Daniel nodded, but decided to ask her a question that had been on his mind for a long time. "Maybe I'll go with you to the next class? I'd like to see how you're progressing." Amanda froze for a moment, but then quickly smiled. "Oh, I don't think that's a good idea. I feel more confident when you're not around. You're going to distract me, and I'm already nervous." This answer did not seem convincing to him. A few days later, driving through the city, Daniel accidentally noticed Amanda's car parked at a small cafe near the driving school. His interest spurred him on, and he decided to stop. Once inside, he looked around, but did not find her among the visitors. The cafe staff seemed to be busy with their own business, and he went back outside, feeling slightly disappointed. Maybe I'm exaggerating, he thought. But more and more often, fragments of thoughts about her strange behavior flashed through his mind. The climax came 2 weeks later. One evening, Daniel decided to surprise Amanda by coming to the driving school to pick her up after class. He parked nearby and waited. The lesson ended. The students began to leave, but Amanda was not among them. A few minutes later, he noticed a familiar figure coming out of the driving school building, accompanied by a middle-aged man. He recognized him immediately. It was her instructor. They were talking about something, and then, to his surprise, the man put his hand on her shoulder, a little longer than it took for a normal farewell conversation. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Amanda didn't notice his car and got into hers. The instructor briefly waved goodbye to her. All the way home, Daniel thought about what he had just seen. Her behavior, her words. All of it now seemed to be part of some intricate pattern that he couldn't put together. That evening, as they sat at dinner, he tried to talk about what had happened. "I drove past the driving school today. I think I saw you there with the instructor." Amanda looked up. Her face remained calm, but there was something like confusion in her eyes. "Yes, we talked a little after class. He gave me some parking tips." Her answer was logical, but Daniel could no longer shake the feeling that she was hiding something. His inner unease grew. Now, every late arrival at home, every call she declined, seemed to him to be part of something more that he did not know about. Daniel decided that he would no longer just wait and speculate. He knew he had to find out the truth, no matter what the consequences. A few days later, when Amanda left for another class, he got into the car and went to the driving school. He was more careful this time. Parked in the shade of the trees nearby, he began to watch. After a while, he saw the instructor's car pulling out of the parking lot. Amanda was sitting in the passenger seat, her head tilted as if she was listening intently to him. They did not drive towards the training ground. The instructor turned onto a side street and stopped at a small cafe. Amanda got out of the car, and they went inside. Daniel waited until they had disappeared into the cafe, then got out of his car and looked inside through the glass door. He saw them at a corner table. The instructor was saying something, leaning closer to Amanda, and she was laughing slightly, pushing her hair behind her ear. The scene seemed harmless, but something about their poses, the way she looked relaxed next to him, caused him a dull irritation. Daniel got back into the car and sat there until they got out. When they finally got into the car and drove away, he followed them, keeping a safe distance. The instructor's car headed to a remote area. A few minutes later, she stopped at a small park. Daniel slowed down, watching Amanda and her instructor get out of the car and head down the path. He felt like everything was boiling inside. He wanted to come out and demand an explanation, but decided he needed more evidence first. He followed them, staying at a distance. When they stopped at one of the benches, he hid behind a tree. The instructor sat down next to Amanda and they started talking. Daniel couldn't hear what was being said, but the instructor's gestures were too personal. He put his hand on her shoulder, then lightly touched her arm. His other hand slid down her thigh, climbing higher and higher under the hem of her skirt. Amanda didn't pull away. Her face was half hidden by her hair, but she didn't look scared. But on the contrary, she was relaxed. This moment held Daniel down. Time froze, and he lost the ability to move for a moment. He stood looking at the stage in front of him as if he couldn't believe his eyes. But the shock quickly turned to anger. He came closer. His shadow fell into the man's field of vision. The instructor abruptly withdrew his hand, noticing movement outside the window. Amanda turned, her eyes widening in horror as she recognized him. Daniel knocked on the window, a heavy, threatening gesture. "Open the door, Amanda." His voice was icy but cracked with emotion. The instructor opened the window, trying to maintain a semblance of calm. "Look, mister, it's not what you think." But Daniel interrupted him. "I'm not talking to you." "Amanda, get out of the car." She hesitated, her hands trembling as she reached for the door handle. "Daniel, it's not what it seems," she began, but he stopped her with a sharp movement of his hand. "Not now. Get out of the car." Amanda came out, her face as pale as chalk. Daniel stared at her with a mixture of anger, pain, and disappointment. "Let's go home. We'll talk there," he said, trying to keep his cool, even though everything was boiling inside. He turned to the instructor, who was still sitting in the car, clearly not knowing how to behave. "I hope you understand that you're in big trouble," Daniel said before turning around and heading back to his car. The drive home was filled with intense silence. Amanda was sitting next to him, her hands folded in her lap, and occasionally glanced at him, as if trying to read his thoughts. But he was silent. When they reached the house, Daniel was the first to go inside. He took off his jacket and threw it over the back of a chair, then turned to Amanda. "Now explain," he said, his voice low, but that made it even more frightening. Amanda looked down, her hands shaking. "It doesn't mean anything. Daniel, please believe me, it was a mistake." "A mistake?" He raised his voice as he stepped closer. "You called it a mistake? Do you think I didn't see what was going on?" She looked up at him, her eyes full of tears. "I didn't want this to happen." "Then why did it happen?" His voice trembled. "Why did you let him?" Amanda couldn't find the words. She only covered her face with her hands, as if it could protect her from his anger and disappointment. Daniel looked at her, feeling the rage begin to fade, giving way to devastation. "I do not know what to do, Amanda. You broke everything I thought was ours." He left the room, leaving her standing there, consumed by guilt and fear. The night was just beginning, and the consequences of this evening had yet to be realized. Daniel closed the bedroom door behind him and sat down heavily on the bed. In the silence, he could only hear his own breathing, uneven and ragged. He closed his eyes, trying to process what had just happened. His mind was filled with images of her face, her horrified gaze, the instructor's hand on her leg. The past and the present seemed to blend into one painful tangle. All those moments of happiness that they had experienced together now seemed to be just an illusion covered with cracks. He wanted to scream, but instead remained silent, feeling his heart constrict. Footsteps sounded outside. Amanda walked slowly to the door, but did not enter. "Daniel, please listen to me." Her voice was low, almost pleading. "I don't have the strength to listen," he replied without looking up. She stood in silence for a few seconds, and then decided to come in. "I've ruined everything," she said, sitting down on the edge of the bed. Her hands fidgeted with the hem of her dress, and she avoided his gaze. "But that doesn't mean anything. I'm confused." "It's gone too far, I'm confused?" He interrupted, finally looking at her. His gaze was icy. "You don't even know what you're saying. You called it a mistake. But mistakes are accidents, Amanda. and what I saw was far from an accident. She covered her face with her hands, but Daniel didn't stop. I trusted you. I accepted your past, your son, and did everything to make you feel safe. And how did you repay me? I do not know why this happened. Her voice broke. I don't have enough attention. He paused, looking at her in disbelief. Attention? He repeated, as if he didn't believe it. Are you serious? Are you saying that I wasn't paying enough attention? She tried to say something, but hesitated, and he didn't give her a chance to continue. You have no idea how I feel. You turned our house into a place of lies. How can I look you in the eye now? Amanda started crying. Tears were rolling down her cheeks, but he didn't feel sorry for her. What do you want from me, Amanda? His voice was quieter, but the anger was still evident in every word. So that I can pretend that it didn't happen? So that I can't forgive you? She reached for his hand, but he pulled it away. I'm ready to do anything. He got out of bed, walking around her as if he couldn't stand to be near her. I'm not sure it's possible. He went to the window, looking out. The night city lived its own life, but inside its house, everything was collapsing. You've ruined everything, Amanda. Not only my trust, but also what I considered our family. She didn't answer. She just sobbed softly, sitting on the edge of the bed, as if she was afraid to move. Daniel sighed and turned to her. We'll talk tomorrow. I can't do it right now. He left the room, leaving her alone, and went to the sofa in the living room. He spent the whole night there trying to sleep, but his thoughts wouldn't let him rest. The question was not whether he would forgive her, but whether he could even move on with what he had learned. Morning came unexpectedly quickly, although for Daniel the night was endless. He sat on the couch, staring into the darkness, replaying the events of the day over and over in his head. With the first rays of the sun, he decided it was time to act. He could no longer live in this state between anger and pain. Getting up, he picked up his phone and started browsing websites with lock replacement services. He had a clear plan in his head. He would complete this chapter of his life, no matter how painful it was. Amanda woke up late. She came out of the bedroom just as Daniel was finishing his conversation with the lockmaker. Her face was pale, and her eyes were red from crying. Daniel, she began, but he held up his hand, gesturing for her to be quiet. We have nothing to talk about. His voice was as cold as the morning wind. I'm sorry. I made a terrible mistake, but I don't want to lose you. He turned abruptly to her, his eyes blazing with anger. A mistake? Do you still call it a mistake? It was a conscious choice, Amanda. You decided to betray me when you let him. He paused, barely able to contain his emotions. It's over. Her lips trembled, and she took a step towards him, but he stepped back. I want you to pack your things. Today. What about Matt? What is it? She asked, her voice trembling. You promised to be a father to him. Those words struck a chord with him. He really loved her son, but even that couldn't make him stay. Matt is an innocent child, but I can't keep living in this house, knowing that everything here is saturated with lies. She burst into tears, but he couldn't feel pity anymore. Pack your things, Amanda. You have a few hours. By lunchtime, the foreman arrived, and Daniel helped him replace the locks. Amanda silently packed her things in the bedroom, while Matt sat on the couch and watched cartoons, not realizing what was happening. When the job was done, Daniel asked her to come over. Here are your keys. He handed her a new set. But that's just so you can get the rest of your stuff. Amanda didn't say anything, just took the keys and went into the bedroom. Later, when she left with Matt, Daniel sat in silence, trying to sort out his emotions. The anger was still boiling inside him, but now it was accompanied by a burning pain. He didn't know what to do next, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't leave it all without consequences. Opening his phone, he went to the instructor's social media page. A minute later, he found her wife. The woman seemed like a happy mother and wife posting family photos. He stared at her profile for a long time, wondering if it was worth destroying her life the way his had been destroyed. But anger took over. He texted her, detailing what he knew, and attached a photo of the instructor's car that he had taken earlier in the parking lot. In the evening, Amanda returned to pick up a few more things. She knocked on the door, but Daniel was in no hurry to open it. He had given her enough time to feel how alien she was now. Did you take everything? What is it? He asked, standing in the doorway. No, there's still something left. He silently stepped aside, allowing her to enter. "I don't want you to leave like that," she said, stopping in the hallway. "We can try." "No, Amanda," he interrupted. "We don't have anything else." She froze in place, her eyes filled with tears. "I deserve another chance." "You deserve what you did," he replied. She wanted to say something, but stopped when she saw his determination. A few days later, Daniel received a reply from the instructor's wife. She was stunned, but thanked him for his honesty. He soon found out that the instructor had been fired and his wife had filed for divorce. Meanwhile, Amanda moved in with her friend, and Matt stayed with her. Daniel was grieving the loss of the boy, but he knew that he could not continue to maintain a relationship with his mother. His life began to gradually return to its usual course, but there was a wound in his heart that would not heal for a long time. A new day was beginning, but for Daniel it seemed like just a continuation of an endless nightmare. He was sitting at the table in the living room, with a cup of coffee in front of him, which had been cold for a long time. The divorce papers spread out on the table had been carefully studied, but still not signed. He understood that these papers would be the final point in his relationship with Amanda, but also in the life he imagined to be perfect. The doorbell roused him from his thoughts. It was his lawyer, who came to clarify the details of the agreement. "Good morning, Daniel," the lawyer said, coming in. "I understand how difficult it is for you right now, but you did everything right. Thanks to the prenuptial agreement, you are fully protected." "It doesn't make the situation any easier," Daniel replied quietly, getting up. They sat down at the table, and the lawyer explained all the details once again. After signing, Amanda could no longer claim either his property or his business. All she could take with her were her personal belongings and what they bought together, although there were few such things. "Sign here and here," the lawyer pointed out, pushing the papers. Daniel took a pen and signed it without hesitation. The papers were taken away, and an hour later he was left alone. Meanwhile, Amanda was staying with her friend Lauren. She tried not to show her son her emotions, but Matt felt that something was wrong. Her life has changed dramatically. She lost her job after learning that her affair with the instructor had become public. Clients of the accounting firm where she worked started complaining, and the management decided to fire her. As the days turned into weeks, her situation became more and more difficult. Lauren couldn't keep her for long, and Amanda had to turn to her sister, with whom she had a strained relationship. "I can't believe you're in this situation," my sister said, pursing her lips when Amanda stopped by with her things. Amanda was silent, trying to avoid unnecessary arguments. For Daniel, the main pain was the loss of connection with Matt. The boy called him several times, but their conversations were short and awkward. Daniel felt that he no longer had the right to be a part of his life, despite the fact that he loved him like his own son. One evening he was sitting at home, flipping through old photos on his phone. In one of the pictures, she and Matt were building a wooden treehouse together. He remembered the boy laughing, swinging a hammer, and Amanda standing downstairs taking pictures of them. Memories washed over him, and he gritted his teeth, trying to suppress the pain. After a few months, Daniel felt that his life was beginning to take on a new meaning. He devoted more time to work, but not to escape from the pain, but to really focus on achieving new goals. He started playing sports, often went out of town just to enjoy the silence and nature. One day, while walking in the park, he saw Matt. The boy was sitting on a bench, leafing through a book. There was no one around. Daniel froze, not knowing what to do. Matt looked up and saw him. "Daniel," he shouted, getting up from the bench. The boy ran up to him and hugged him tightly. Daniel felt his heart constrict with pain and joy at the same time. "How are you, boy?" "What is it?" he asked, bending down to look into his eyes. "I miss you," Matt said honestly. "I miss you too," Daniel replied, his voice trembling. They sat down on a bench and talked for almost an hour. Matt talked about school, how he misses their old home, and even that he would like to ride a bike with him again. "Maybe we can go sometime?" "What is it?" he asked, his eyes shining with hope. Daniel nodded. "Of course, Matt. Anytime." When they parted, Daniel felt as if something new had appeared in his soul, a sense of hope. Life went on. He was still learning to deal with the consequences of what had happened, but it was getting easier every day. He realized that he had gone through the most difficult period of his life and came out of it stronger. And although his heart was still scarred, He began to believe that there was something more ahead of him. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.